Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. My name is Alison Stewart and I'm your host of this session of Cut the Crop. And today we've got David Densley, our senior maize researcher, with us again, because you're becoming a sort of a common occurrence giving podcasts. It's great. Yes. So today we're going to talk about the revised maize forage trading good practice guide protocols. What a mouthful that is. Okay. So I think what we should do is maybe start off with talking about what it is and what we currently have before we talk about what the revised version is.
Indeed. And hello, Alison. Great to be back in the chair again. So it is useful to take a step back and before we talk about the revised forage trading code of practice, good practice guidelines. If you think about maize, so the maize in New Zealand, so about 80% of that is maize silage, 20% of it is maize grain. Of the 80% of maize silage, about half that is traded between a grower and a dairy farmer. And so it's traded historically, back in the early 90s, that was just traded on a per hectare basis. So both parties would agree on a rate per hectare. And then they would, the money would exchange. But of course, as we know, just paying on a per hectare basis, you don't know whether someone must be missing out because it's just an estimation. So it evolved from that in the early 90s. And so then this small industry popped up and some people would go in and do some hand harvest cuts inside the maize crop. And then they would estimate the yield. And so now we've got an estimated yield that the buyer and seller would agree on. And so that was okay for a time, Alison, but then that still didn't represent the final yield in the paddock. And so this group called the Forage Trading Development Group, which I was part of, I was a chair of this group, did some research, and FAR was heavily involved in that as well. We did some research around how we can more fairly trade maize forage between buyer and seller. So that investigated. So just in short, there's two parts to that. Obviously, you need an accurate wet weight, and then you need an accurate dry matter analysis. So we did some work around, protocols for sampling to achieve fairly accurate dry matters. Now, one of the challenges in maize to determine dry matter in maize is that it's a heterogeneous plant. So you've got the stover part and you've got the grain part, and the stover is half as dry. It's got half the dry matter as grain. And so if you sample and you disproportionately sample the stover and the grain, it affects your total dry matter analysis, and that has huge implications. So out of that research back then, we developed this protocol around sampling, and so how you sample to achieve a relatively accurate dry matter for the maize it's trading.
So this is just a voluntary thing. The growers and the dairy farmers, they just agree to sort of use this protocol. There's no requirement that they have to.
No, there's not. So, but if you're going to trade on a dry matter basis, then you have to come up with a protocol for determining dry matter. And so most of the maize trading industry use the contract that was developed from the original Forage Trading Development Group protocol.
Who made up that group?
Yeah, so the contractors, so far were involved in that group. Some of the seed companies, Pioneer was involved in that group. Hill Laboratories was involved as well, and some farmers and some scientists as well. So there was a small group of us, and it was actually quite an intensive bit of research. And you can go on now and look for that good practice guide. Currently, it sits on the FAR website. So when the Forage Trading Development Group had finished its work, it handed the protocol on for safekeeping to FAR, and it currently sits on the FAR website. So you can go on there, find the good practice guide, and then the contract that sits around that.
So how long has that the current contract, how long has that been in existence?
So in the early 2000s, we formed that. So it's been out there since then.
Okay. So what was the rationale then for revising it? What was wrong with the existing protocol?
So when we did that initial work, we looked at how many samples we needed to collect to try and represent the field, the paddock. Now, back then, climate change wasn't as having the impact that it is today. And so we had relatively uniform fields. So we're able to develop that protocol that said, okay, you need to take this many samples. You want this level of accuracy for your dry matter, you need to take this many samples. But since then, of course, we're under climate change. We're having a warmer and drier summers. And so we actually have this variability in the field more than when we did the original research. And so it becomes even more challenging, Alison. So you've got this heterogeneous plant, you've got all that variability between the stover and the grain, and then you've got some dry areas of the field, and that dry matter will be much higher. And then you've got some areas that don't dry out as much, so that dry matter will be much lower. And so how do you possibly sample that, using the traditional methodology, which we're just going to launch, we're going to talk about this new methodology. But prior to that, that was as good as we had, really.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the new technology. What is it and how does it work?
Yes. And so we're here to announce that, Alison. So that is actually NIR. So using NIR on the forage harvester to measure the dry matter as the harvester goes through the field. Now, the research that we've done is actually with John Deere. So it's a John Deere Harvest Lab 3000 NIR technology. So John Deere invested in that research here in New Zealand with the assistance of Jakob Kleinsman, and FAR have sort of got involved in that as well and supported that. So that research has been done for over a couple of years. And what it set out to do was compare the NIR dry matters with the lab analysis and look at the accuracy or the variability of accuracy between those two methodologies.
And what came out of that?
Yes. And so in short, the NIR was within 1.5 percentage points dry matter of the lab. Now, there's a couple of considerations here we need to remember, Alison. One is when you sample, so using the traditional methodology, when you sample, you try and collect some representative samples from the field. Okay, and as we mentioned before, there's a whole lot of variability in the field. And so how do you possibly collect samples that represent the field? Whereas NIR is measuring every single centimetre of that field. So even though the NIR may not be as accurate as the lab, because it's analysing every single centimetre, your weighted average, that whole dry matter across the field becomes much, much more accurate than the current practice.
So is it quicker and easier for the grower?
Absolutely. So, so with the John Deere Forage, the Harvest Lab, which is what the research was done on, that's happening in the cab. So provided the contractor uses the calibration methodology as recommended by John Deere, then simply as a harvesting through the field, that's recording. Those dry matters are recording. So the wet weight is being collected through some certified scales, like it is today. So we'll have the wet weight, and then the dry matters are collected inside the cab.
So what happens if you're a contractor and you don't have a John Deere?
Yes. And so right now, for now, it is John Deere. So it's only the John Deere Harvest Lab that will be included in the alternative dry matter protocol. But other manufacturers can certainly go out there and do the research. They can prove their concept. They can talk to us about that, Alison. And then once that proof of concept is there, then we can include that in the protocol, in the Good Practice Guide protocol.
So presumably, though you'll have to have both protocols still available, because there'll be some that have got John Deere and can use the new protocol, and there'll be others that don't, and they will use the existing protocol.
Absolutely. And this is really important to understand, Alison. It's a good point. So until NIR was launched, the old protocol was take the wet weight and collect the samples as per the protocol, current protocol. And so that still exists. So if you don't have a John Deere with an NIR on it, then you will use the protocol that was developed from the 2000s, early 2000s. Okay, so that will be life as usual for that group. If you've got a John Deere forage harvester and it's got an NIR and it meets the calibration process, then you have an option inside the contract. Right, so I'm selling maize silage to you, Alison. We have a contract. I'm providing it to you. You'll buy it from me, and we agree that we will use the NIR as a methodology for testing the dry matters. If, as a dairy farmer, you're buying it from me, you don't agree, then we will revert back to the older, the standard protocol.
So when is this all going to come into effect?
Yep, so this will be ready for harvest. So we've got harvest coming up in February, early February. The northern parts will start harvesting. And so alongside this good practice guide, we've updated the contract as well. So there's a new contract in place that outlines option A to do standard dry matters or option B to use an NIR. So that's an agreed between two parties inside the contract. So that's all sits inside the FAR website. So you go on and find that, and then the parties agree and then move forward. So we're excited about this, Alison, because of the reasons that I mentioned before, because of the challenges inside the field, the variability. And we think this is probably a first of its kind actually globally, using proven NIR technology that's calibrated according to the manufacturers to be able to trade in forage. But it is for maize forage only, because that's what the research has been done on.
But presumably it is a technology that could be applied to other forage species if the research was done.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because the NIR sits on the discharge chute on the forage harvester, and it measures things like dry matters and minerals and nutrients inside the forage. So absolutely can be applied, provided the research is done, any forage that's going through that forage harvester.
So you've mentioned NIR, near infrared. Can you just explain to the few people out there that might not know exactly what near infrared is? What is the technology?
Near infrared spectrometry emits a light. It's a device, in this case, sits on the delivery chute of the forage harvester, and it emits a light into the forage, and then that light sort of bounces back, and there's an algorithm inside there, Alison. Don't ask me to explain that. But there's an algorithm in there that it can interpret the light that's bouncing off the forage in this case, and it measures dry matter and other things as well. So it'll measure proteins and starches and ADFs and NDFs, and it's really, really smart technology. Yeah, and in that you can generate some yield maps as well.
So if anybody out there wants to know more about it, go on to the FAR website.
We are excited about this technology. It's been robustly analysed. I didn't mention we've pulled a panel together of different folk, and they've reviewed the research, and they're confident that this really is a good alternative option for determining whole plant dry matter, and I think it will help make the trading process fairer. Alison.
Excellent. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, Alison.
And thank you very much, listeners. Have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.